Now, when we talked through the impromptu speech, we spent some time talking about introductions and conclusions for the impromptu speech. But those are pretty simple affairs, right? It was a two-point speech. You just kind of wanted to get into the body of the argument very quickly. Now, in your informative speech, that introduction is probably going to be doing more work for you. It's going to be setting up more. It's going to be performing more of a role for your audience. So I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some additional ideas you might have for informative introductions and conclusions. This doesn't eliminate what you're doing in the impromptu, but if you have the opportunity or if there's the need, these are other things you can be thinking about to include in your informative speeches. Now, I just want to very briefly talk about some ideas for the introduction and some ideas for the conclusion. So in an informative speech, an introduction is very important, right? Because it's setting the stage for what you're going to be doing. In that impromptu, it was so short, you'd be halfway through the speech by the time someone figured out they didn't want to listen. But in this informative speech, you probably have more time, and so you want to spend a little bit more attention, devote more attention to setting us up for what's about to happen. So we want to let the audience know in the introduction, first off, that we've started, but we also want to grab their attention and then take that attention and turn it into interest in our topic matter, as well as letting them know how we're going to proceed. So here's some things you might want to think about for your informative speech. Having sort of an opening device, having a statement of relevance or some tie to the audience, and then finally, providing that audience with some type of orientation as to how the speech is going to be followed. So I want to talk through each one of these. So, I don't want to suggest that each and every speech has to do these three things and only these three things, but there are some useful ideas in helping you figure out what you're going to do for your informative speech. So in terms of opening devices, well, this is just those opening lines, that first thing that you're saying, your hook, how you're getting the audience into your speech. And there's lots of things you can be doing if you've got the time to plan it out more deliberately. Well, you can certainly start off with a story or an example, right? That's a great way of helping us understand that topic very quickly. You may remember from last week, there was a sample speech by Hans Rosling on the website. And I sort of talked through it and used it as an illustration of how he was using examples. Well, that example, he was talking about washing machines. Go back and watch it if you haven't. It's wonderful. So, but that was a great way of starting that speech because it was just so it provided a personal route into his topic. Just talking about his mother and his grandmother and their first washing machine. So that was a great way of just opening that speech. Now, he didn't sit there and the entire time reflect upon his family life. It was a means to an end. That example got us into his topic. Many years ago, and this is the exact opposite of fun, but I was helping someone working on a speech on licensing at-home daycare centers. So daycare centers all over the country, right? Some of them are licensed. They go through formal review. Others are at-home daycare, so it's someone runs a daycare out of their home. And sometimes these will be unlicensed, under the radar. And so one of the problems that we wanted to discuss, or one of the issues that we wanted to make people aware of, is that sometimes this underregulation can cause problems. So we started the speech with a story of at-home daycare center, and there was a woman who was working. It was her home. She was tending to two kids fighting in the living room, and there was a child in a high chair in the kitchen, and it slipped in the high chair, and it caught its head, and it strangled to death. It was awful. Terrible story, but a true story, and one that quickly reaffirmed the importance of that topic. And it upped the stakes. It says, what I'm going to talk about may sound boring, but there are real consequences to it. So opening that speech with an example can do a lot for you. It might be more interesting for that audience, but it can also clearly and effectively illustrate the topic that you're discussing. Now, if you've got an example, that's great. Sometimes you maybe want to start with a quotation. If there's a really good quotation that you think is a nice bridge to your topic. Or maybe you start off with a surprising fact or statistic. Whatever you choose, the idea is to grab that audience's attention, quickly get them into your topic. But I do think, especially for informative speeches, that you don't want the subject matter to be a mystery. I want to very quickly within my introduction for an informative speech let the audience know what I'm talking about. If someone was taking notes on my presentation, they would know what to write at the top of the page. Oh, he's talking about whatever. So I want to signal what the topic title is so that people know what I'm going to be discussing. Now that opening device is just there to grab attention. Attention in and of itself might fade. We want to take that attention once we have it and convert it to interest. Okay? So we're moving from that opening device to a statement of relevance. So basically, after I've got somebody's attention, I want to provide a quick explanation why they should pay attention. Okay? Why they should continue to devote their mental energies towards what I'm saying. So I want to think through at least making explicit what that audience can get out of this presentation. So, you might be thinking about formally providing an answer to the question, why should I pay attention? What am I going to get out of this? Is it a matter of personal impact, right? Is this an influential issue? Is it going to affect the audience's daily life? Or is there maybe sort of more of a general impact? It's a common issue. It affects many people, even if it doesn't affect you. Maybe this issue is going to affect how we think about other things outside of your topic realm, or maybe it's just fascinating in and of itself. But I think you want to have a sentence or two basically providing the rationale for why an audience member should pay attention. So for business presentations, you would sort of open up the presentation and then probably talk about how your subject matter affects the organization or perhaps some other divisions here at this company. For research presentations, you might say, well, this is how this issue, what I'm going to be presenting on, affects our collective understanding of another research idea or of future research possibilities. Okay, so I want to grab the audience's attention. Okay, opening device. I want to convert that attention into interest through sort of explaining why someone would want to pay attention. And then I want to just orient the audience to how we're going to be spending our time together. So we've done this in the impromptu speech through a formal preview of your main points. I think you still want to do that here. It doesn't have to be overly formal, and different settings are going to call for different types of previews, but I just think you want to be able to say to the audience, I'm going to carve up our time into 3 general domains. One thing you might also consider doing in this orientation phase of the introduction is sort of laying out what your goals are for the presentation. You may also remember from last week we looked at a TED Talk on urban beekeeping. That was one of the last things that we looked at last week when we evaluated it through the rubric. Well, one of the things that urban beekeeper does at the beginning of his speech is he says very clearly, my goal for this presentation is to change how you think about bees and beekeeping. He states just flat out what he wants the audience to do. He states his goal there. And that's kind of helpful to me as a listener, knowing how and why the speakers designed their presentation in that way. Now, of course, always the danger of stating your goal is if at the end you haven't achieved it, well, we all know that you failed. You know that you failed, we've known that you failed, and how glorious for all of us. But in that case, I mean, he's not going to fail. I mean, it's not like a huge threshold that he set up there. But I do think you want to have a formal part of that introduction where you're just sort of very briefly laying out, here's what we're going to be doing, here's why I'm doing it. So that's kind of what I want you to be thinking about for your informative introductions. An opening device, a statement of relevance, and an orientation to the speech itself. So we know how you're going to navigate your time. All right, introductions. Let's talk a little bit about conclusions. Conclusions typically are shorter, right? Because this is coming after we've heard all that information. So if the introduction is setting us up for it, the conclusion is just sort of reaffirming it and giving us a nice thought to go out on. So in terms of your review, well, I think that so again in your conclusion, you should probably review your key points and then end on a concluding device. So in that review, once again, you're just hitting those key ideas. Whatever you said in your preview, you're probably saying again in your review. Okay? You're not redoing the whole speech, that's gone. You're just hitting the key themes, reaffirming what those key themes were. If somebody left your speech and somebody said, well, what was the speech about? Oh, it was about 3 things, right? You told us what those 3 things were at the preview, and you reminded us what those 3 things were in the review. So it's just it's a way of reinforcing those key ideas, And it also provides a strategic function because it's starting to signal to your audience that you're about to be done. You're not done yet, but you're about to finish. And that's also good. It's sort of helping us adjust our expectations. Okay? And then you get into sort of that final line or those final couple of lines. Well, in an informative speech, you can certainly plan these out more deliberately, and that's a good thing. So after you've reminded us of the topic's importance, you've got these couple of lines that you can just use to sort of put the final capper on your speech. One thing that can help, or one thing that's kind of nice to do, is whatever you started out with at the beginning of the speech, maybe now you pick up again in the concluding device. So you started off with a discussion of washing machines, end with a discussion of washing machines. In that speech I mentioned, where we started with that story of the child who died, well, we certainly ended with that. That was a real solid concluding note that reaffirmed the topic's importance, but also tied back to the conclusion. So we got a real nice alpha omega thing going on with our speech here. It shows sort of deliberate attention to its arrangement, and it sounds like you're done. So as you're working through your informative speech, by now you should have a fully functional draft. That's really where my concern is, making sure you've got your key ideas in their proper order and you're knowing how you're working through it. Introductions and conclusions should come last because it's trying to figure out how, as novices to this information, how we need to be walked into this material and then how we can leave this material. And that's what introductions and conclusions do. They're strategic in their design. Certainly for informative speeches. When we get into sort of, eulogies or something like that, the introductions and conclusions are performing different roles. But here, they're helping us navigate our time with the speaker and with the audience. So those introductions should quickly grab our attention, get us interested in the topic, orient us to how you're going to spend your time. We hear your speech, and then at the end, we're reminded of what those key ideas are, and you send us off with a nice concluding note. So with that, we'll end our discussion of introductions and conclusions, and next we'll take up this key issue of ethos.